I was there when the sea itself turned against Spain. I was a common sailor, born to the narrow streets of Seville, where the smell of tar and salt clung to my skin long before I could walk. I had served on merchant ships across the Atlantic, ferried silver from the New World, fought storms and hunger, but nothing prepared me for the great Armada, the Invincible Fleet, that our King Philip II swore was chosen by God to bring down the heretic queen across the Channel. They told us we would be the hand of heaven, that our sails would blot out the sun, that the bells of London would toll in morning before the summer was through. And when we first set sail, it felt true. 130 ships, row upon row, their white sails swelling like cathedrals upon the sea, their banners of Christ fluttering in the wind. Cannons lined the decks, muskets stacked like harvest sheaves, rosaries clutched in calloused hands. Priests blessed us with holy water before we departed Lisbon, chanting prayers of victory, their voices rising above the crash of waves. I remember the pride swelling in my chest, the certainty that we were invincible indeed, for how could God abandon his chosen warriors? But pride is a dangerous cargo. It weighs down the heart more than gold. From the moment we left port, the sea whispered. Otherwise, winds turned against us. Storms scattered us. Sickness crept through the lower decks where men slept in their own filth. The grand galleons groaned under the weight of supplies, moving not as swift falcons, but as lumbering beasts. And though our admiral swore order, confusion spread like rotten timber. Signals lost in fog, captains unsure of command, promises of unity fraying before we even glimpsed England's shores. When at last we approached the Channel, we saw not a nation trembling, but a hornet's nest stirred to fury. The English ships were smaller, faster, striking like wolves upon our flanks. I remember the first volley at Plymouth, the sky split by fire, smoke choking our lungs, men screaming as cannonballs ripped through oak and flesh alike. And yet, we pressed on. We told ourselves the English were gnats, that their queen was weak, that their god had no power. Still, unease gnawed at us. Each night, as I lay on the damp boards of my bunk, I could not banish the thought, if we were invincible, why did the sea resist us so? Why did the wind favor our enemy? The truth revealed itself at Calais. When English fire ships came drifting toward us, hulks ablaze, sacrificial coffins of flame, panic tore through the fleet, chains rattled, anchors cut loose in haste, ships colliding in the frenzy to escape. The order we had clung to, the solemn pride of a holy mission, dissolved into chaos of screams and curses. I saw men leap into the sea rather than burn. I saw captains abandon prayer for terror, and I understood then that our enemy was not only England, but the sea itself, and the fear that grew within us. Yet the worst was still to come. We thought we could retreat, circle north around Scotland, return to Spain with dignity intact. But the heavens had other plans. Storms rose like vengeful giants, hurling our ships against rocks, scattering us into oblivion. What fire and shot did not destroy, the winds and waves devoured. I saw proud galleons split upon Irish cliffs, their masts snapping like twigs. Their crews dashed upon the rocks. I saw comrades clinging to wreckage, their prayers drowned by the roar of the sea. And I knew then, with a terror that hollowed my soul, that God had turned his face from us. We were no longer the Armada Invincible. We were only men, broken and scattered, begging the mercy of a sea that had none. I was born in Seville, where the Guadalquivir River carries the scent of salt and tar from the ocean beyond, where every boy grows up with sails in his eyes and storms in his blood. My father was a cooper, shaping barrels for merchants who trafficked in silver and spices. He never left the city, never once touched the open sea, but he smelled of oak and pitch, of goods bound for the Indies, and his stories were full of ships, great hulks leaving the port, returning heavy with treasures of a world I could only imagine. From the moment I could walk, I would run to the docks to watch them depart. The clatter of rigging, the groan of timbers, the white sails swelling against the blue sky. Those ships were miracles to me, floating cathedrals that defied the endless hunger of the sea. My childhood was one of hunger and devotion. We lived in a cramped house that leaned against its neighbor, the air always damp, the nights always filled with the cries of stray dogs. My mother kept a crucifix above the hearth, and every morning she made me cross myself before going out into the world. Remember, she said, Spain is chosen by God. We are his sword. In Seville, faith was not a choice. It was the air we breathed, the very rhythm of our lives. Priests thundered in the pulpits about heresy, about God's wrath, about our sacred duty to defend the true faith. I was too young to understand the politics of kings and popes, but I understood enough, that we Spaniards were God's warriors, that our ships did not only carry gold and silver, but his will. I was barely 12 when I first set foot on a ship, not as a sailor, but as a cabin boy, carrying water to men whose faces were burned by sun and salt. They laughed at me, cuffed me on the head, called me raton because I was small and quick, yet I adored them. I watched how they tied knots, how they read the wind, how they cursed the sea as though it were a woman they both loved and hated. At night, They told tales of storms and battles, of voyages across oceans so vast the stars themselves seemed to guide them. I listened with eyes wide, heart thundering, certain that I had found the life God intended for me. The sea is both teacher and tormentor. My first lesson came in the form of sickness, days of vomiting. My body wrung out until I thought I would die. The older sailors laughed, saying every man must be baptized by the sea. I learned to endure the rolling deck, to sleep in hammocks that swayed like cradles, to climb rigging while the wind clawed at my skin. I learned the taste of salt pork gone rancid, of water gone sour, of hunger gnawing at my belly, and I learned that death was never far. Men fell from masts, drowned in storms, rotted from fevers. Each time, we crossed ourselves, consigned them to the waves and sailed on. The sea gave no mercy. By the time I was 15, I had crossed to the Indies twice, seen the mountains of silver in Potosi, the markets of Havana, the endless horizon of the Atlantic. I had seen men whipped for theft, hanged for mutiny, buried at sea, wrapped in canvas and prayer. And yet, for all the hardship, my heart belonged to the waves, for in the spray of salt on my face, in the creak of timber and the snap of sails, I felt alive in a way no land could grant. I told myself I was not merely earning bread. I was serving God's empire. Spain in those days was drunk on its own glory. We were the richest kingdom in Christendom, fattened on gold and silver from the New World, feared for our armies, revered for our faith. In Seville, ships crowded the docks, laden with treasures that made men believe our empire eternal. I believed it too. We all did. We thought ourselves invincible. Our King Philip God's chosen warrior. When priests preached that Elizabeth of England was a heretic queen, a Jezebel who spat upon the true faith, we cheered when they promised her downfall. For us, war was not just duty, it was destiny. And so, when the call came for sailors to join the Armada, I did not hesitate. I was 20 then, hardened by years at sea, my hands scarred from rope, my lungs seared by storms. I signed my name with trembling pride. To serve on the Invincible Fleet was not merely service, it was sanctification. We were told our ships were angels of God, our mission holy, our victory certain. Priests marched among us, blessing our banners, sprinkling holy water on our brows. God sails with you, they said. I believed them. We all did. I can still recall the day we gathered in Lisbon. The harbor was a forest of masts, sails furled like folded wings, banners snapping in the wind. Men thronged the decks, armor glinting, muskets stacked, cannons bristling. It seemed less a fleet than a floating city, a fortress of oak and iron. My chest swelled with pride as I looked upon it, thinking, here is Spain's glory. Here is God's sword. We sang hymns as we loaded provisions, our voices rising above the clatter of chains and the groan of timber. I thought of my father's old words, that Spain was chosen by God, and now I felt it in my bones. But pride blinds, pride deafens. I did not see then the rot beneath the glory, the disunity of commanders, the cumbersome weight of our ships, the hunger already gnawing at our stores. I saw only the glittering promise of destiny, the certainty that God himself rode the wind in our sails. I was a child still, though I wore a man's scars, and I believed in the invincibility of Spain. It would not be long before the sea taught me otherwise. When the Armada finally unfurled its sails, the sight was unlike anything I had ever seen in all my years upon the sea. The harbor at Lisbon erupted in a roar of voices, prayers, and creaking timbers as the ships pulled away from the safety of land. It was as if a floating kingdom was setting forth, a city upon the waves, each galleon crowned with banners of Christ, each galley groaning with the weight of guns and men. Priests blessed us from the docks, their arms raised as though to command heaven itself, and we, the sailors, bowed our heads in reverence. Never before had so many vessels flown beneath one command. Never before had Spain seemed so powerful. They told us the Armada was invincible, and looking upon that endless horizon of sails, I believed it without question. The flagship, San Martin, led the way, its decks bristling with cannons, its sails white as angels' robes. Around it clustered the great galleons, San Juan de Portugal, San Marcos, Nuestra Señora del Rosario, each a fortress of oak, carrying soldiers enough to storm cities, priests enough to sanctify an empire. Behind them stretched squadrons of supply ships, caravels, hulks laden with powder, grain, wine, and the tools of war. When the wind caught our sails, the Armada spread across the sea like a floating wall of faith and steel. Its sheer size meant to terrify any who looked upon it. We were told that Queen Elizabeth herself would tremble when she heard our approach, that the English would kneel, and her heretic banners would be torn down before the month was through. For a time, the illusion held. On deck we sang hymns, our voices carried across the waters, mingling with the crash of waves. Officers spoke of victory as though it had already been granted. God fights for us, one declared, and with God's hand, who can stand against Spain? I wanted to believe him. I clutched the rosary my mother had pressed into my hand before I left Seville. the beads worn smooth from my fingers. Each time I prayed upon it, I saw not danger but triumph, not storms but salvation. The channel, however, is no obedient servant. From the moment we entered those narrow, hostile waters, the English were upon us, ships smaller, quicker, hungrier for blood. They darted like wolves among our lumbering giants, striking and retreating before our cannons could turn. At Plymouth, they came, dark sails streaking against the dawn. The thunder of their guns split the sky, their shot tearing into our hulls with shocking precision. Men screamed, timbers shattered, but still we pressed forward. We told ourselves they were gnats, mere insects buzzing against our invincible fleet. Yet the gnats stung, and each sting drew blood. I remember one night when fireships descended upon us at Calais, hulks set ablaze, drifting toward our anchored fleet with the tide. They glowed like floating coffins, their flames whipping skyward. The crackle of burning pitch louder than our prayers. Panic seized the decks. Anchors were cut, chains hacked with axes, captains shouting contradictory orders. Ships collided in the frenzy, masts splintering, men leaping into the black water rather than burn alive. The order that had been our pride dissolved into chaos. By dawn, the sea was littered with wreckage, and though the fireships had not destroyed us outright, they had shattered our illusion of invincibility. Still, we clung to hope. Our orders were to unite with the Duke of Parma's army in the Low Countries, to ferry his soldiers across for the great invasion, but messages faltered, winds shifted, and the English pressed us mercilessly. At Gravelands, the battle came full. Their ships darted close, unleashing broadsides that ripped through our galleons. Cannonballs screamed, smoke billowed. Men were hurled like ragdolls from the decks. I manned the rigging, hauling lines as shot tore the sails above me. The world below a blur of fire and blood. Our cannons roared back, but too slow, too cumbersome. The English moved like wasps, stinging again and again, while our hulking giants flailed, unable to strike. I saw the San Mateo drift crippled, her mast shattered, men clinging to the rails as flames licked her hull. I saw comrades torn apart, their blood painting the decks, their prayers drowned in the roar of battle. The smell of powder and death clung to my lungs, choking me with every breath. And yet, amid the chaos, our captain still bellowed, "For God and for Spain." And we, exhausted and bloodied, still answered, "For faith is hard to kill, even when the sea itself conspires against you." When at last the battle ended, we told ourselves we had survived, that God had preserved us for victory still. But the truth was plain in our eyes. The Armada was not unbroken. Many ships were crippled, supplies dwindling, morale frayed, and worse, the wind had turned. We could no longer press south through the channel. To survive, we had to turn north, circle Scotland, and pray for mercy on the long return. That was the moment our fame shifted into folly, for though Spain remained proud, though priests still called us chosen, we sailors knew the truth. We were hunted men. The sea, the wind, and the English all had turned against us. Still our commanders spoke of destiny, of the holy mission. "God will guide us home," they said, as surely as he led Moses through the Red Sea. But as I looked upon the battered ships, their sails torn, their decks stained with blood, I wondered if we were not the Israelites but Pharaoh's army, swallowed by the waters we had thought our path to glory. And yet, even then, some part of me clung to the grandeur of it all. For had we not sailed in the greatest fleet Christendom had ever seen, had we not carried banners of heaven upon the waters of hell, our fame was real, even if fleeting. The world had looked upon us and trembled. But fame is a poor shield against storms, and pride a poor provision for hunger. We were still Spain's invincible armada, at least in name. But already I felt the cracks beneath the gilded mask. Already I feared the sea would demand its price in full. From Gravelines onward, the sea became our true enemy. The English ships still harried us. Yes, but it was the ocean and the sky that showed their claws. Our proud armada, once a wall of sails stretching from horizon to horizon, was now scattered and broken, each ship limping on its own, searching for wind, searching for hope. Hunger gnawed at us as fiercely as cannon fire had. The bread turned to mold, the salted meat reeked of rot, and the water stank like a stagnant ditch. Men grew thin, their cheeks hollow, their eyes wild with fever. The once gleaming decks of our galleons were slick with filth, the air heavy with sickness. And all the while, the commanders shouted of faith, of God's will, as if words could fill empty stomachs or heal festering wounds. I will never forget the nights of that retreat, when the channel gave way to the vast, cold waters of the north. The wind cut like knives, the sea rose like mountains, and we clung to the rigging with numb fingers as waves crashed over the decks. Every groan of the timbers sounded like a death knell, every shriek of the wind like the wail of a widow. Some ships vanished into the mist and were never seen again. Others reappeared days later, battered, sails in tatters, crews reduced to half their number. We no longer sailed as one fleet, one armada. We were a scattering of broken souls, each praying only to see Spain again. And yet, even then, the cruelty had not reached its height. That came as we rounded Scotland, driven ever north by winds that seemed sent not by heaven but by hell. Storms raged for days, tearing sails to shreds, snapping masts like twigs. I clung to the rigging as lightning split the sky, illuminating the chaos. Ships tossed like driftwood, men hurled screaming into the black water, waves swallowing them whole. The ocean was a beast, and we were nothing but meat between its teeth. Off the coast of Ireland, the sea claimed its richest feast. Driven by the gales, ships crashed against jagged cliffs, their hulls splintering. Their crews dashed upon rocks slick with foam and blood. I remember the sound of it, the crack of timbers breaking apart, the roar of the storm, the screams of men drowning in the surf. The beaches were littered with wreckage, bodies washing ashore like refuse, their faces pale, their eyes staring at the gray sky. Some survivors crawled onto land only to be slaughtered by locals, terrified or vengeful, who saw in us not fellow men, but invaders washed up from a failed conquest. Spain's proud soldiers, who had marched beneath banners of Christ, died naked and bleeding in the mud, their rosaries torn from their necks, their prayers drowned in foreign tongues. I saw comrades I had known since boyhood perish like that. Alonso, who once taught me how to tie a bowline, beaten to death with a club by a fisherman. Martin, who had sung hymns with me on the deck at Lisbon, lying face down on the rocks, his skull split open by the waves. I wanted to rage at the heavens, to demand why God had abandoned us, but my lips were too dry, my strength too faint. I could only cling to what ship remained. My hands blistered, my heart hollow, and through it all, the cruelest torment was this. We had been told we were chosen. Priests had sworn the Armada was God's own instrument, that victory was assured, that angels filled our sails. But as ship after ship sank, as men starved and froze, the only angels we saw were carved in ivory upon the rosaries of the dead. Faith itself began to rot, like the bread in our barrels. Men cursed God, cursed the king, cursed the sea. Some threw themselves into the water, preferring the mercy of the waves to the mockery of survival. Others clung to prayer more desperately, insisting the suffering was a test, that glory awaited us still. I did not know what to believe. Each day, I awoke surprised that I still breathed, and each night I slept expecting not to wake again. By the time we limped back towards Spain, fewer than half the Armada remained. Once we had been a floating city, a wall of power stretching across the horizon. Now we were a trickle of crippled hulks, sails ragged, decks empty, our guns silent, our pride drowned. We did not look like victors, nor even like soldiers. We looked like beggars, who had wandered too far and been whipped by the world for our presumption. When at last we sighted the coast of Galicia, men fell to their knees, weeping, kissing the planks of the deck, unable to believe we had survived. But it was not triumph that filled our hearts, it was shame. We returned not as the invincible sword of God, but as broken survivors, haunted by the screams of those the sea had swallowed. In the harbors, mothers waited for sons who would never come, wives for husbands who lay rotting beneath foreign waves, and the people, who had prayed for victory, now whispered that perhaps God himself had turned against Spain. I, too, whispered it in my heart, for how else could I explain the ruin? We had set forth with banners of Christ, with priests blessing every mast, with faith burning in every chest, and yet the English had lived, and we had died. Was it cannon fire that broke us, or storms, or our own arrogance? I did not know. I only knew that the name Armada Invincible was now a bitter jest, a ghost that would haunt Spain forever. And I, a sailor who had once believed in our destiny, carried back not glory, not treasure, but the weight of memory, the sight of burning ships, the cries of drowning men, the endless roar of storms that no prayer could silence. We had thought ourselves chosen, but in truth we were no more than men, and men cannot command the sea. The sea saved its most merciless fury for the end. If the English had bloodied us with shot and flame, it was the storms that finished the work, grinding the Armada into fragments until even the most faithful among us could no longer pretend. We carried God's favor. By the time we turned northward from the Channel, we were already shadows of ourselves, hollow-eyed, weakened by hunger, ships splintered and groaning. But when the storms came, we learned what it was to be broken beyond repair. It began with a wind that rose from nowhere, a scream across the rigging that made the masts shudder. At first, we thought it only another gale, one we could ride out with prayer and seamanship. But the sky darkened like ink spilling across parchment, the waves swelled into mountains, and the heavens opened with rain that felt like stones hurled. From God's hand, the fleet scattered, each ship fighting for its life. I was aboard the San Juan, and I remember the deck tilting beneath me so sharply that men tumbled into the sea like dolls. We clung to the rigging with hands torn raw, shouting prayers into the roar of the wind. Santa Maria, Cristo, Misericordia! But the storm did not hear us. Night fell, and with it came the true terror. Lightning split the skies, revealing ships, tossed like toys, their sails shredded, their hulls cracking. One moment, I saw the silhouette of a galleon beside us. The next, it vanished beneath a wall of water. and when the lightning flashed again, only wreckage remained. The sea did not kill swiftly. Men clung to floating beams, screaming as waves dragged them under. Their cries swallowed into the blackness. I can still hear them in my dreams, the sound of drowning men, each voice a plea unanswered. We thought it could not grow worse, but worse always came. Off the coast of Ireland, the storm drove us mercilessly toward jagged cliffs. The rocks loomed, like teeth in the darkness, and ship after ship was dashed against them, breaking apart with a thunder louder than cannon fire. I saw comrades hurled into the surf, their bodies smashed upon stone, their blood mingling with foam. Some made it to shore, crawling upon their bellies, only to be cut down by Irish blades. The locals, fearing invasion, showed no mercy. Survivors staggered through bog and field, only to be hunted like animals. Spain's chosen sons, once an army of God, died like nameless beggars, their bones left for crows on the San Juan. We fought to steer clear, the helmsman weeping as he wrestled, with a rudder that no longer obeyed. The mast snapped, crashing down upon the deck, crushing 2 men where they stood. The hull groaned, timbers splitting, water pouring in faster than our pumps could expel it. I thought of my mother then, of Seville's warm streets, of the rosary. She pressed into my hand. I fingered the beads, slippery with salt and blood, and begged the Virgin to carry me home. But in my heart, I knew she would not. For days we drifted, storm after storm battering us, until all sense of direction was lost. We were no longer a fleet, just wreckage scattered across the endless gray. Hunger hollowed us further. The salted meat was gone, the bread nothing but slime. Men chewed leather straps, drank rainwater cupped in trembling hands. Some muttered prayers, others cursed God with lips cracked and bleeding. One man leapt into the sea, laughing as he vanished beneath the waves. Madness stalked us, as surely as hunger. At last the storm broke, leaving us in silence more terrifying than the roar had been. The sea was calm, but it was a graveyard. Bodies floated among the wreckage, bloated and pale, their eyes staring blankly at the sky. I saw a mast drifting by, with 2 corpses lashed to it as though they had tied themselves there in a final attempt at life. The gulls circled above, shrieking, tearing at flesh. Our ship, crippled, limped on, sails patched with rags, the deck littered with the dead. Fewer than half of us remained. When at last we sighted the coast of Spain, our hearts did not leap. With joy, we wept, yes, but the tears were bitter. We returned not as victors, but as phantoms, the remnants of a dream drowned by waves. The harbors that once rang with cheers were silent, the people staring as we staggered ashore. Mothers searched our ranks for sons who would never come. Wives clutched children who would never know their fathers. The glory of Spain, the pride of Philip's vision, had been consumed utterly. I survived, though I cannot say why. Stronger men than I were lost. Braver men dragged beneath the sea. Nobler men dashed against the cliffs. Perhaps survival itself was the cruelest punishment, for each night when I close my eyes I see it all again. The fireships blazing at Calais, the decks awash in blood at Gravelines, the cliffs of Ireland tearing galleons apart, the endless storm roaring like the voice of judgment. I see faces I loved, men who laughed with me in Seville's taverns, now lying pale and silent beneath black waters. The Armada had been called Invincible. The priests swore we were God's chosen, that heaven itself sailed with us. But in the end, the truth was revealed. We were mortal men, and the sea bows to no king, no pope, no empire. Pride had built us up. The storm had torn us down. Spain, once the terror of Europe, returned wounded, humbled, haunted, and I, a sailor of Seville, returned with nothing but scars and memories. Not even the rosary remained. I lost it to the sea when the mast broke above me, but perhaps that is fitting, for whatever faith I carried was torn from me that summer of 1588. Scattered like wreckage upon the waves, I still breathe, but part of me lies there still, in the storms, in the wreckage, in the drowned cries of my brothers. I did return to Spain, but not to triumph, not to parades, not to the glory that had been promised when we first unfurled our sails in Lisbon. We staggered back like beggars, hollow-eyed and broken, our ships limping into ports that had once cheered our departure. The bells that rang were not for victory, but for funerals. In the taverns, men whispered the word invincible with bitter laughter, as if mocking their own hopes. Mothers wept at the docks. Priests spoke of God's mysterious will, but their voices trembled, and even they seemed uncertain whether heaven had blessed us or condemned us. For Spain, the Armada was meant to be the sword of faith, the proof that we were God's chosen empire. Instead, it became our humiliation. Half the fleet was gone, thousands of men swallowed by sea and storm, and nothing to show for it but wreckage upon foreign shores. The treasure that poured into Seville's vaults could not hide the truth. Spain had bled, and the blood had been spilled not in victory, but in shame. And yet, what strikes me most, what lingers in my heart even more than the screams and storms, is how swiftly the world turned. The English, once trembling upon their island, now walked taller, claiming God had favored them. Their poets sang of Elizabeth as a queen chosen by heaven, Their sailors boasted of driving us back with fire and steel. The sea, once Spain's domain, now whispered another name. In the wreck of the Armada, the seed of England's empire was planted, and though I did not know it then, the shadow of that island would one day stretch farther than Spain's banners ever had. For us who survived, there was no comfort. The king did not greet us. His eyes turned already to other wars, other ambitions. We were ghosts, forgotten by the very crown we had bled for. Some tried to return to the sea, but few found ships willing to take them. Others drank themselves into oblivion, haunted by the storms. As for me, I left the docks of Seville behind, and wandered inland, trying to escape the sound of waves. But the sea never leaves a man once it has marked him. Even now, in quiet nights, I wake with the taste of salt on my tongue, with the roar of storms in my ears. What was the Armada then? Was it the wrath of God against our pride? Was it the folly of kings who mistook faith for strategy? Or was it simply the sea, indifferent and eternal, grinding down men who dared to claim it as their servant? I cannot say. I only know that Spain, for all her gold, for all her faith, was not invincible. And perhaps no nation ever is. I was a sailor, nothing more. I carried ropes. I scrubbed decks. I hauled sails. Yet I became part of a story greater than any king's decree. I sailed with the Armada invincible, and I watched it die. And though I live to tell of it, a part of me lies still beneath those waves, with the banners and the bodies, with the prayers that went unanswered. If history remembers us, let it not be for our pride, nor for our shame, but for the truth that we were men who followed faith into the jaws of the sea, and learned too late that no fleet, no empire, no crown is invincible.